Israel has just attacked a Syrian airbase that Turkey considers strategically important, and Ankara's first response was to make one thing absolutely clear. No Turkish military delegation was at the base when the strike happened. Turkey is helping rebuild Syria's military under the idea of a single army, while Israel says it will not tolerate a Turkish military presence in southern Syria. Now, an Israeli strike has collided with Ankara's expanding role in post-war Syria. The question is no longer simply why Israel struck a Syrian airbase. The bigger question is whether Syria is becoming the next arena for a direct strategic confrontation between Israel and Turkey. Turkey has emerged as one of the most influential outside powers in Syria following the collapse of the previous order. Ankara says it wants to help Syria preserve its sovereignty, rebuild infrastructure, and develop a unified military structure. Israel sees the situation differently. It has repeatedly acted militarily inside Syria to prevent threats near its borders. That creates a basic collision. Turkey wants a stronger, unified Syrian state. Israel wants to prevent hostile military capabilities from taking root in Syria. And Abu al-Duhur has now become a symbol of that collision. On Thursday, Turkey's defense ministry explicitly stated that no Turkish military delegation had been at Abu al-Duhur before or during Israel's attack. Ankara also condemned the strike as an attack on Syria's stability, security, unity, territorial integrity, and infrastructure. Why emphasize the absence of Turkish personnel? Because Israel's calculations change dramatically if Turkish forces are physically present at a target. A strike against Syrian military infrastructure is one thing. A strike that risks killing Turkish personnel could trigger a much larger confrontation involving a NATO member. Turkey therefore has an obvious interest in separating itself from the target while still defending Syria's sovereignty. That distinction gives both sides room to avoid immediate escalation. But it also exposes the deeper problem. The two countries increasingly have competing ideas about who should shape Syria's security future. And that takes us to the second revelation. Syria is becoming a contest over military influence, not simply territory. Turkey says it will continue supporting Syria's efforts to build infrastructure and military capacity under the principle of a single army. A unified Syrian military would give Damascus greater control over its territory and reduce armed groups operating independently. For Ankara, that could support a more stable neighbor and a security structure reflecting Turkish interests. Israel could see the same development as a potential threat. A stronger Syrian military, especially one receiving Turkish assistance, could eventually create a more capable force near Israel's northern frontier. From Israel's perspective, preventing dangerous military infrastructure from emerging may be easier than confronting it after Syria becomes stronger. That helps explain why Israel continues to emphasize its security red lines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel will not tolerate a Turkish military presence in southern Syria. That warning turns the Syrian battlefield into something more complicated than a conflict between Israel and Damascus. Now there are three strategic layers: Syria trying to rebuild its state, Turkey trying to influence that rebuilding, and Israel trying to prevent the new Syrian security architecture from creating threats. The danger is that these objectives can collide even when none of the actors wants a full-scale war. And the third revelation is that Turkey's response suggests Ankara is preparing for a broader regional security role. The Turkish Defense Ministry said the country had become a center for regional security diplomacy, pointing to calls by Chief of the General Staff General Selçuk Bayraktaroglu with US and regional counterparts. That matters because Ankara is not treating Abu al-Duhur as an isolated incident. Turkey is positioning itself as a diplomatic and military actor capable of talking simultaneously to Syria, the United States, and regional powers. Its message is broader than Syria. Turkish officials warned that Israeli military interventions in neighboring countries must not become normalized. That language directly challenges the security logic Israel has used for years. Strike potential threats before they become larger threats. Turkey instead argues that regional stability requires respect for sovereignty and international law. The two doctrines are fundamentally different. Israel prioritizes preventive military action. Turkey is publicly prioritizing territorial integrity and state sovereignty. That disagreement becomes dangerous because both countries possess serious military capabilities. Turkey has one of NATO's largest armed forces, while Israel possesses advanced air power, intelligence, and precision strike capabilities. Neither side needs to declare war for their interests to collide. A single strike, deployment, weapons transfer, or misunderstanding could create pressure for escalation. And Syria is not the only place where Ankara is watching Israel. Turkey's defense ministry also criticized Israel's continued military activity in southern Lebanon and linked it to the broader regional crisis, including Gaza. This means Ankara increasingly views Israeli operations across several fronts as part of one regional pattern. For the Middle East, that creates a dangerous possibility. Syria could become the point where separate conflicts begin connecting. For Turkey, the stakes are enormous. A stable and sovereign Syria could strengthen Ankara's regional influence, reduce security threats along its southern border, and create a more predictable environment for reconstruction. For Israel, the stakes are equally serious. A stronger Syrian state, backed by Turkey, could eventually limit Israel's freedom to operate inside Syria. For the United States and NATO, the situation creates another complication. Turkey remains a major NATO member, while Israel remains one of Washington's closest regional partners. A prolonged Turkish-Israeli confrontation over Syria would force Western powers to balance two strategically important relationships. And for Syria itself, the danger is obvious. The country is trying to rebuild its institutions while larger powers compete over what its security system should look like. That is why the al-Duhur strike matters beyond one airbase. Turkey is trying to build a stronger Syrian state. Israel is trying to prevent a hostile military architecture from emerging. Syria wants sovereignty, and outside powers are increasingly shaping what that sovereignty can actually mean. The immediate question is whether Ankara and Jerusalem can keep those competing interests below the threshold of direct confrontation. Because if they cannot, Syria may stop being merely a country recovering from war and become the next battlefield in a strategic contest between two regional powers.